We are Myth Vision. Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I have Dr. Joseph A.P. Wilson with me today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Star Wars, but please introduce yourself and tell us, what do you have for us today?
So I'm an anthropologist by training, and I teach in 3 different programs. I teach anthropology, I teach religion studies, and I teach history. And one of my master's degrees is in Asian religions. So, and I'm really, my work deals with a lot of different areas, but one of the main things I do is like long distance interaction, East-West interaction. So I'm interested in like the way that religions are related to other religions over the medieval period a lot. And so, so this kind of was interest that I've had since I was, for decades, since I was in graduate school in Asian studies. So I'm here to talk about what I think is an unappreciated little linguistic thing that connects the Force religion, Jediism, in honor of Star Wars Day, May 4th, that connects the Force religion to a medieval Buddhist-Christian hybrid heresy called Manichaeism, founded by the prophet Mani in 3rd century Babylon. And so he's the founder of this incredibly important syncretic religion that is probably, I always tell my students that this is the most important religion that most people have never heard of. It was like for 1,000 years, it was one of the more popular minority religions in the Silk Road, right? So basically along the overland trade routes of Eurasia, it was a major religion, not a minor religion. And it served as kind of a filter between Eastern and Western religions because it was chameleonic. And from the perspective of the Western religions, it was a Western religion. And from the perspective of the Eastern religions, it was an Eastern religion. So it was Buddha. It was a form of Buddhism for Buddhists and a form of Christianity for Christians. So in particular places like in the Uyghur Khaganate of 8th and 9th century Western, what's now Western China, but was then an independent Central Asian kingdom, it was there was actually a Uyghur theocracy there in some of these major economic hubs of the Central Eurasian trade routes. Because if you're like a merchants there, it would be cool to have a religion that you could relate to the Eastern and Western trading partners as, co-religionists, even though they're not actually co-religionists with each other. Via Manichaeism, you can have like, this sort of solidarity with all of your constituents. So it's one of these quintessentially Central Asian religious systems, but as a result of that, it transformed ideas that then could diffuse westward or eastward and influence the main religions that were not technically that closely related to each other. Right. And so Star Wars religion, George Lucas, in an interview in the New York Times in the 1990s, said that he's a Buddhist Methodist, right? He claims a kind of a Buddhist-Christian, and there's all kinds of ways that the Jedi religion and the Force religion are like a merger between Buddhist and Christian ideas. Like the virgin birth, and there's various parables that like come and echo through the story.
Walking on water is something I think Buddha did.
Right. But... like the whole scene when Luke has to lift the X-wing out of the swamp, and Yoda says, "You didn't believe, and that's why you failed." It's just like Christ lecturing Peter about his lack of faith when he like walks a little bit on the water and then goes and falls in the water. It's right. Very much like that, a version of that storyline, but with Luke in the role of Peter and Yoda acting like Christ, right? So there's like a number of these little tidbits that show that it's kind of a Buddhist and Christian marriage.
Let me know if I need to bring up any slides, by the way. Let me know if I ever need to bring any slides up. So.
Oh yeah, so you can start the slideshow at any time.
Okay.
So thank you to Brian Reedy, who gave me permission to use his awesome little Japanese style woodcut image of Yoda levitating himself. So there was a period, as I would say, in around the 3rd century in Persia, when you have early missionary Buddhism and early missionary Christianity overlap on the Greco-Persian frontier buffer zone, right? So in other words, where Hellenistic influence and Persian influence are both major, and you have coming out of North India and into Central Asia, you have early missionary Buddhism. At the same time, you have early missionary Christianity moving eastward along the trade routes out of Syria. And it's there that Mani is born in Babylon, which is a Zoroastrian theocracy. And he's born under a relatively tolerant ruler that's trying to, so the Zoroastrianism at the time was still forming, like state religion wasn't like fully fledged yet, but it was trying to kind of integrate the different religious constituencies of the empire. So the Persians wanted to make a society where the Western Greek-speaking, you know, many of them Christians, could be seen integrated within a larger society. So you can see Manichaeism as kind of like a project where he gets born as and he sees himself as a prophet at an early age. His family, when he's a small child, converts to Jewish Christianity. So it's kind of a Gnostic form of Christianity, but it's one that still eats kosher, but it's vegetarian. It's called the Elkosites. They're similar to the Ebionites. So his family, he's part of a religious minority in Babylon, which is the Jewish Christians, but he sees himself as an apostle to Jesus in the mold of St. Paul. Like he's another, so he experiences visions of the resurrected Jesus as a young child that make him see himself as the apostle of light, as kind of the second coming, and also the second coming of the Buddha and Zoroaster, right? So all three religions get merged into one. And so his very Gnostic cosmogony. So he's got basically like in Zoroastrianism, you have like light and darkness. You know this, like the dark side of the force and the light side of the force. You have this cosmic dualism where it's light is spirit, darkness is matter, and they're kind of at war in the universe. Well, the Manichaeans would be folks who'd say that you can separate them. Right? They would say you can actually, so from the time of creation, matter and light are interpenetrated, so that all living things, all life in the universe is like a bound together matrix of dark matter and light spirit. And that the job of a Manichaean monk is to separate the two and to return the world of light to pure light and exile the world of darkness to pure and matter, right? So do you want to play that clip?
Hear you nothing that I say. Master, moving stones around is one thing. This is totally different. No different. Only different in your mind. You must unlearn what you have learned. All right, I'll give it a try. No, try not. Do or do not. There is no try. I can't. It's too big. Size matters not. Look at me. Judge me by my size, do you? And where you should not. For my ally is the Force. And a powerful ally it is. Life creates it. Makes it grow. Its energy surrounds us. And binds us. Luminous beings, though we, not this crude matter.
Anyways, the famous scene where Yoda is talking to Luke about the Force, and he says we are luminous, that Force is all life, and we are luminous beings, not this crude matter. So he's making an anti-materialist statement that's very much in keeping with Buddhist-Christian ideas in Manichaeism. So I think that Manichaeism may be a kind of a covert influence on George Lucas. So let's go back to the slides and we'll just talk about some general Buddhist Christian stuff that comes from this matrix. All right, so it looks like there's one line on the thing that's not showing, but it doesn't matter. Just pointing out that monastic traditions, so monks and nuns, are uncannily similar in Buddhism and Christianity, right? There's like to live in a monastery means you shave your head, you either slap yourself with a stick, or you might slap your brother with a stick to mortify their flesh, right? So there's like, and that's true if you're in a Zen monastery or like a Catholic monastery.
Mm-hmm.
There's tons of these similarities in practices. So the shaving of the head, the almsgiving, meditation practices, vows of silence, things like that, celibacy, confessional rites, which we think of the rite of confession as being, or the sacrament of confession as being like a universal Catholic thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it was only in the late medieval modern period that it left monasteries and became like a general thing that just like that regular Christians did. But originally, confession was something that monks did with other monks, like that personal thing where you go in the little confessional. So that's also something that you see in Buddhism, for example. You see all these sort of, the use of bells in worship, the veneration of the bones of dead people, like reliquary. That's like really weird for a lot of religions, but not for Buddhist and Christian monastic traditions, right? They have like these veneration of reliquary boxes with human remains inside, and counting rosary beads, and the bulbous metal change sensors that monks or priests will swing, and like the incense cloud will rise up. So like all this material culture and practical similarity comes from somewhere. It's not a coincidence.
Right.
The very earliest establishment of monasticism in Christianity happened in Egypt, the Desert Fathers. So the desert monks in Egypt. Guess what else was being practiced at the same time in that part of Egypt?
Buddhism?
No. Buddhism never made it that far west, but Manichaeism did.
Okay.
Remember, St. Augustine was originally Manichaean.
Right.
Manichaeism was huge in North Africa. So Christian monasticism comes from North Africa at a time when Manichaean monastic institutions were already established. And where did they get their ideas about monastic discipline from? It was baked in from the beginning, right? Manichaeans were Buddhists and Christians.
Right.
They saw themselves as both. So when they're setting up monasteries, they're bringing Buddhist ideas into the Christian world, and Christianity then gets to run with them. They're getting them from an intermediary. They're not getting them straight from Buddhism. They're getting them via a and this is a little controversial, but it's fairly clear that there were widespread, deeply institutionalized Manichaean institutions in North Africa at the time that early Christian monasteries were first set up. And so that's pretty straightforward argument, right? It's not like you're saying it came from outer space here. It's
yeah.
There's a direct. So syncretism is when a religion blends to other religions, and much syncretism is kind of covert. It's like you don't acknowledge directly that there was like Zoroastrian influence in Judaism, for example. That's not like something that people advertise. But Manichaeism embraced it, right? Manichaeism was supposed to syncretize. It was like saying these other religions are rivers into one ocean. The ocean being Manichaeism, sort of the way the Baha'i faith.
Right. I was just thinking about that.
Or Sikhism in India has a little bit of that. There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim, there's only God. And that's, you know what I mean? That's the way that the Sikhs would look at it. So there's a similar kind of idea that Mani is saying, that all other religions are correct, but they're not as correct as this one. This one is the complete total thing. Yeah. So we've said all this. He's portrayed as both the second coming of Jesus, the second coming of the Buddha, the second coming of Zoroaster, all at once.
So
and
that's
his practitioners are instantly persecuted. So this is the other thing with Star Wars. It's like the rebellion against the Empire. Imperial theocracies hate Manichaeans. They generally are treated badly everywhere for the entire duration of their existence.
Is this what George Lucas, you think, is doing? Has he made a comment about this?
I have no idea. I would love to talk to him about it. You can see him interviewing like the Joseph Campbell Power of Myth series. He does a long interview about like the hero with the 1,000 faces and the way that world mythology influences Star Wars. So I would, if he were accessible, which he is not.
Right.
I would love to have a chat with him about what exactly he was reading when he was in community college in California in the 70s, and when he was doing research on the screenplay for Empire Strikes Back in the 80s. What books did he have access to then?
Right. Are the Jedis the Manichaeans
The
who are being persecuted?
Jedi seem like persecuted Manichaeans a little bit. The way they're systematically hunted to extinction by a convert from their order, right? Like, you know, Anakin Skywalker is one of them and then turns on them. So like St. Augustine used to be a Manichaean, and then he's like, screw this, and he like jettisons it, and then he becomes one of the main ways that it's annihilated in the West is through the doctrinal, you know, and the polemical arguments against Manichaeism started by St. Augustine and continue forward. So Manichaeism doesn't exactly disappear, though. It goes underground. It loses its distinctive identity, but it retains a lot of its underlying feeling. And so there's a continuous history of heresy in the West that is somewhat indebted to Persian cosmic dualism, even though.
And you're calling it heresy, but for our audience, like the heresiologists are calling it heresy. Technically, yeah.
That's right. And I don't use that with the pejorative sense.
Right.
I embrace the term. I've always sort of thought of myself as a heretic, so therefore I don't like say that with any malice.
Right.
A heretic is in my opinion, is not something to be ashamed of.
Right.
But so that you know, but for those people who pass judgment, from the perspective of the Manichae, they're not the heretic. They're the orthodoxy, and the other ones are the, you know, it's always the heretic is always the person that's not in the dominant faith tradition.
Of course.
And the fact is they were classed as heresies not just by Christians, but by Buddhists and by Zoroastrians. Mani himself was martyred in Zoroastrian Persia by the Zoroastrian theocracy. They according to the Manichaean sources, he was either crucified or flayed alive, right? So that fulfills his claim to be, you know, like Christ, you know what I mean? He has this sort of the same story. He ends up getting martyred, and his religion still survives, of course, just because the whole idea of reliquary worship comes out of this context. Third century, like when did Christians start venerating the bones of dead martyrs? In the late 3rd century. At the same time it happens to Mani. It happens in the West, it happens in the East. There's all this, you know, physical persecution of these new religions, and they use it as kind of like to build themselves, to say, look, you know, the forces of darkness are against us, and we're fighting it. But something else I want to say. So, you know the Diocletianic persecutions?
No.
Are you aware of that?
Well, I'm not aware of the word.
Right before the Edict of Milan. You know, but the Edict of Milan,
yes,
general amnesty, religious freedom, which allowed, and then it took a few more generations for like Christian theocracy to become not general religious freedom. Now it's only religious freedom for some people. But originally, for a few decades after Constantine, there was general religious freedom. During that period of time, Christians and Manichaeans coexisted side by side at peace within the Roman Empire, right? So there was a period of multiple generations when Manichaees and Orthodox Christians, Orthodox/Catholic Christians, were not at odds with each other, right? There were ways, so they had social solidarity for a while. And they also had social solidarity when they were both persecuted. So when Diocletian, he was the guy who sets up the diocese, he sets up like he ends the barracks emperors period when you have all this like bloodshed in Rome. He stabilizes the empire and makes it the lasting thing that it kind of becomes through like Justinian and all that. You know, the endurance of the Eastern Roman Empire is possible because the bloodshed of the 3rd century ends when Diocletian comes along and says, all right, we're not going to have, you know, emperors coming out of the barracks anymore. We're going to have like Persian style elite ruler way above everybody. We're going to set up the tetrarchy with, you know, administrative control of the East and West under 2 different leaders on each side and all this stuff. But what he does is he persecutes Christians and Manichaeans side by side during right around the turn of the 4th century. So late 3rd, early 4th century, you have a period when not just Christians are being thrown to the lions, Manichaeans too are being burned alive in the arenas. Right, and their scriptures are. So this is what I'm saying. There's social. So at the time that both these religions are kind of getting off the ground, they have a period of social solidarity, and a number of their stories from this period are found in both traditions. Like the martyrdom of Mani is almost exactly like the martyrdom of Saint Bartholomew in Armenia. The story of that story, it's like almost identical. The story of Mani's own death. What a Zoroastrian theocrat is mad because this great apostle is converting his brother to this new religion. So he says, you must die and we flay you alive. Right? These kinds of ideas are coming out of both Manichaean and Christian contexts at the same time. And so one of the saints I was going to talk about in my slideshow, can you put it up and skip forward until you get to the Saint Eustace? So we got I have too many slides here. There's a picture of Jesus as the Buddha from medieval Japan. Okay, move forward. That's a Manichaean prophet, Jesus in the Buddhist guise. So I was going to talk about, I have a lot of slides here. Clement of Alexandria had a positive view of Buddhists. I was just going to say that, and he was right before Mani. And so Mani is coming out of a period when Buddhists and Christians were not antagonistic towards each other. Okay, so skip forward. There's a picture of the Christianized Buddha. So Bodhisattva becomes Josaphat through several translation stages. So the Manichaeans give it a monotheistic gloss. So Buddhism is non-theistic or not monotheistic, but it becomes its scriptures become transformed into more like Western monotheism, because as the Manichaeans syncretize Eastern and Western texts, they also harmonize them.
Right.
They introduced Western religious theology and dogma into texts of Buddhist origin. So you have Josaphat as a pious prince of a horrible pagan king, and he has to escape his father's palace. Are you familiar with the birth and the early mission of Buddha? Do you know this story?
Isn't he a prince and he's supposed to have like a noble rule, but there's probably different stories, I suspect, floating around, but one of them I know of is he's out in the field and he sees someone who's like working the fields, and like a bird comes by and like picks up a worm or something like that, and he realizes the suffering of the world or something, and it like causes him like traumatic.
He's trapped in a pleasure palace. His dad is told when he's miraculously born, there's like omens and prophecies, and the wise men are like saying he'll either be a religious leader and save the world, or he'll be a world ruling tyrant. And dad's like, yeah, I want him to be the tyrant. So he traps him in a pleasure palace full of like naked ladies and drugs, and basically doesn't let him ever see suffering in the world. But he becomes profoundly dissatisfied with this and starts sneaking out of the palace at night on his loyal horse.
Doesn't he see someone dying or something?
He sees an old man, he sees a sick man, he sees a dead man, and he sees a monk. The monk is the fourth sight, and that monk also becomes a Christian saint, Saint Barlam, which is a corruption of the term Bhagavat, which is like Lord or a title for a Buddha or like a really powerful religious leader. So the monk that sends the Buddha on his religious mission is like becomes a desert hermit, like one of those desert fathers named Barlam. And so skip forward in the slideshow if you can. So this is how I think where the word Yoda might come from. One possible explanation for where George Lucas gets the word Yoda. So Bodhisattva, which means enlightenment being in Sanskrit, and refers to one who will become a Buddha. It turns into Arabic Buddhasaf. But the letter B in Arabic looks a lot like the letter Y. The difference is a slightly different shape of the squiggle and a slightly different diacritic underneath. So when you're transcribing it, it's easy to confuse B and Y. So when it gets transcribed from Arabic into Georgian and Greek, Buddhasaf becomes Iodasaf. Iodasaf. So Yodasaf, right? Yodasaf. Then later, delta and the omega, or is it? I forget. I think it is an omega, not an omicron. Yeah, the delta and the omega. So no, not delta. The omega is fine. The omega is the O syllable. The delta and the alpha are little triangular things, and they look similar, so they accidentally get squashed together. So basically, the D disappears and gets merged with the A because of the difficulty in reading the manuscript. So Yodasoph becomes Joasoph, and Joasoph gets confused in Latin with the Hebrew name Jehoshaphat. So Joasoph becomes Josaphat. So you basically, through a number of translational steps, you start with Bodhisattva in Asia, and it turns into Josaphat in Latin, and in a bunch of other European languages. And it becomes a really popular saint's life story along with all these others. So yeah, my hunch is that George Lucas read a standard book about the Christianization of the Buddha. There were like books written in the late 19th century that would have been easily accessible in any university library in the 1970s. And if he pulls out this book and he's reading about how the Buddha gets turned into a Christian saint, and he sees the passage describing the transcription from Arabic into Georgian, and he might have noticed that name Yoda there in the Manichaean version of the Buddhists' biography. So it's right at that stage in Persia when you have Manichaeans living under Islamic rule that they're going to be really careful to make him a good monotheist, because Islam's criteria over whether you're a legitimate religion or not is whether you believe in one God and the Day of Judgment. So if the Manichaees originally had more polytheistic kind of tendencies in their scriptures, it's possible that those would be ironed out during transmission westward. Okay,
wow.
Can we move forward again? So here's just a picture of Saint Barlaam instructing Josaphat, and it looks a lot like Obi-Wan Kenobi instructing young Luke. And remember, what young Luke is also a young boy, a prince who doesn't know that, well, not quite a prince. He doesn't know who his real father is, but he's actually descended from the Jedis himself. But he thinks he's just some kid stuck on a planet, forced to live with his family. But he ends up, and he wants to leave. So he ends up leaving and meeting this desert hermit who then instructs him in the ways of the Force. And so that's a picture of Saint Josaphat. Another little thing, another popular episode, there's the description of the man being chased by a unicorn and falling into a well, and then being attacked by a dragon at the bottom of the well and snakes coming out of the walls. I always think of this as kind of the Sarlacc pit. The word unicorn is one that in Arabic and Greek can also mean rhinoceros. And so the mythological unicorn is a distortion of what is probably a real animal, a rhinoceros. In fact, the original Buddhist version, it was an angry elephant. So at some point, the elephant becomes a rhino and the rhino becomes a unicorn. So this is a picture of an Arabic manuscript of the story. And I think of little Grogu, baby Yoda's Mandalorian clan signet, the mudhorn, which is a version of an extinct Siberian woolly rhinoceros, which is called the Siberian unicorn. So that unicorn rhino thing, I just wanted to show a little bit of that. Here's a picture again of Josaphat being told the parable by Barlaam. Barlaam is telling him the parable of the man falling in the well and being attacked by the dragons. And the lesson of it is to don't be deluded by your senses, because while he's hanging on these branches, he gets to taste some wild honey, and the wild honey makes him think, oh, everything's fine. It's like the little dog in the burning house. Everything's fine because he's got his coffee, right? The coffee is causing him to ignore the peril of his existence, that mortality is, you know what I mean? In other words, the Buddha has to conquer death itself, and death is chasing him from above and below and from all sides around him. And so don't be deluded by the sense pleasures that say that the problem isn't going away. Some Zen versions of this get really chilled out, like live in the moment, enjoy the wild strawberries that you find on the
I actually know a parable.
That is a version of the same parable, but it's one that has a slightly different moral, but it's the same story.
Got it.
So we could go on all day. There's about 5 or 6 important medieval saints' lives that are derived from Sanskrit originals via this sort of long, slow process of transmission. So let's skip that one. I want to talk about St. Eustace, because St. Eustace is a guy, he was a general. St. Eustace was a general in Trajan's time who was a pagan soldier, allegedly, who had a vision of Christ in the form of a deer when he was about to shoot the deer, and Christ turned around and said, "Dude, why are you trying to kill me, man? I'm your savior." And he falls down and he gets converted by the talking deer. The deer tells him to that it's not cool for him to be shooting at Christ like that, because he is Christ. And then he ends up becoming a great saint. That story is one of the penultimate previous lives of the Buddha. So actually, it's a combination of 2 of them. There's one called King Brahmadatta and the Banyan deer, which I showed the slide for before. That's the first half of the Eustace story. The second half of the Eustace story is a version of the Vishvantara Jataka, which is the story of the very last incarnation of the Buddha before the historical Buddha. So, because remember, like, the Buddha has like a bunch of different previous life stories, these legends of his previous lives. Mm-hmm. So the second to last life before the historical one, he was a prince who, sort of like Job, abandons his family and he gets tested by the gods. And he eventually gets everything restored to him when he proves loyalty. So it's kind of like a little bit similar to the.
It's almost like Solomon too, in a weird way, because he is told, what wishes do you want? And he wants nothing but wisdom, and then ends up getting all those things as well once he's proven that it wasn't the material gain that he wanted in that particular legend. But the problem is he sacrifices I don't know how many animals on the altar in that particular tale. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So he ends up being proven good in the end. But so the story of Eustace is basically a combination of 2 different Jataka stories into one big story, where the first half of it is one Jataka story and the second half of his life is the second Jataka story. But what happens at the end is he gets killed by Diocletian. The Diocletian persecution happens. He's forced to choose between eating meat that's been sacrificed to an idol or not. And so he gets roasted alive in one of these bronze bowls in the arenas, where you put him inside the bowl, light a fire underneath, and your bellows of agony come out of the mouth of the bull. Like it makes it sound like the bull is groaning and making bull noises, but it's actually just the amplification of the screams of the person that's being
what the hell
this horrific invention. So that story, the fact that these Buddhist-Christian stories are told about in the context of the Diocletianic persecution, which, remember, I told you was a period when both Christians and Manichaeans were being tortured to death publicly side by side, right? I'm just saying that this is the window of time that we're talking about, that and these are told much later than that, but they're kind of like an echo through the ages of the memory of that period. Right. And the fact is that they get the fact that they originate in this heretical Buddhist-Christian hybrid context doesn't stop them from being popular among all Christians. Right? They end up becoming like the Golden Legend, which was like a major medieval novel. It was like a bestseller. It was all these awesome saints and what they did. There's like 5 or 6 of them that have Sanskrit, in this giant book of saints' lives. There's 5 or 6 of them that are not originally Christian at all, but come from Buddhist India.
Oh, this is another one of the same.
Just another picture of Eustace being, in the arena. And then another one, a version of this, is the one Saint Hubert in Germany is the German version of Eustace. The same story, but retold in a different setting, right? He's got the same exact biography as Eustace, but it's set later. He's not, and the deer doesn't talk to him. It's a little more sanitized. The deer is like, it's the disembodied voice of Jesus that's comes from the heavens, and the deer is just there, like the deer is just like being a deer, not an intelligent deer.
Right.
and he's not being punished for attacking Christ in the form of a deer. He's impiously hunting on Good Friday. So Hubert's sin is that he's being a nobleman. He's like engaging in sport hunting when he's supposed to be praying the Stations of the Cross in church, and Jesus gets mad from up above and says, "You know better, Hubert," and he ends up having this into it. So that's a picture of the Hubert story from Leonardo. I think that's from Leonardo da Vinci's tomb. A lot of these stories get illustrated in fantastic medieval artwork. You go to like churches in Italy, you can see scenes from some of these Buddhist stories in major altarpieces above doorways. There's like the scene of the man chasing the unicorn chasing the man into the tree. That's a lot. That's commonly illustrated in major Christian artwork. And so it's really cool. Oh yeah, this one, Saint Christopher, the Christ bearer. He is Kalmasappada, who was a cannibal demon ogre who tried to eat one of the Buddha's previous incarnations. So little Prince Sutasoma, who would be reborn as the Buddha some X number of lives into the future. Little Prince Sutasoma is like taking a bath in the river, and this cannibal demon ogre loves princes. They're like his favorite snack. And he sneaks up and plucks him out of the water and carries him over the water on his back to go eat him. But while he's doing that, he's getting preached to the whole time. The little prince is like dispensing the dharma of the true religion into the cannibal demon ogre's ear, and the cannibal demon ogre says, "Wow, I shouldn't really be a cannibal, should I? That's not cool. Instead, I'll protect you." And he gets turned from a monstrous demon into a protector of children. And so that becomes not probably through the story. The story of Saint Christopher is a little bit different. Remember, but the general features. So Saint Christopher is also a gigantic dog-headed cannibal in the Byzantine version, like the original Eastern version of the Christopher legend. He's a gigantic dog-headed cannibal who it turns into a ferryman, right? He eventually renounces his cannibalism, and he ferries people across a river, and one of the people that he ferries across the river is the Christ child, and he becomes the Saint Christopher we know as the protector of travelers as a result of his encounter with the Christ child as he's crossing the river. That is not identical story, but it's likely that art transmitted this. So I talked about those other ones where there's clear examples of texts where people are like written documents that get transformed over multiple generations of scribal copying with errors and stuff. In the case of Saint Christopher, it's much more likely that he was that the iconography, the images of Kalmasappada carrying Sutasoma inspired images of Christopher carrying Christ. So you can see some of the other images here. Move forward here.
Yeah, these are
the contemporary Indonesian pictures of this guy, animal-headed, ugly guy. One more forward. Here's a picture of in the Western version, he's a human with really hairy face. He's like a beastly. Think of like one of those Game of Thrones guys, like a Hound or somebody. You know what I mean? Like a big, burly, ugly, bearded guy. But if you look at one more forward, the Byzantine versions, he's always got the head of a dog.
Wow.
And so the notion that he is a protector of the child savior who has the head of a cannibal and eats people. I mean, the head of an animal and eats people until he's taught that that's bad and you shouldn't do that, is the basic gist of it. Okay, yeah, and then I could talk about the dog Saint Guinevere, which is another one, but I included too many slides, and I don't think
no biggie.
Covered all today. There's lots of these ins and outs we could go. Let's get back to Star Wars though, because it's Star Wars Day. I don't know for sure if any scholar of Star Wars would validate that there's a real genuine connection specifically to the legend of Josaphat. But I think it's too, the name Yoda Soph is too similar to be a coincidence, in my opinion, especially given the other aspects of the Force religion that resemble Manichaeism in particular. and the fact that it's the light and darkness in conflict with each other, and the imperial bad guys with the rebellious order, monastic order, classed as heretics, systematically hunted. I didn't get to say that. I didn't get to specify that it wasn't just in the West, right? So like at the earliest stage that Buddhism is established in Tibet, Manichaeans are involved. But then the earliest Tibetan emperors ban it. They say it's heresy, and they condemn it, and they say it can't be officially practiced. So it influences at the ground level early Tibetan Buddhism in the 8th century, at the time when, remember I said that there was a Manichaean theocracy in nearby parts of East Central Asia. So as you move up into the Tibetan plateau, you get the influence of that Manichaeism there at the ground level. China is the place where Manichaeism survives the longest as a separate religion. So in China, that's where you have like long-term, multi-century, enduring Manichaean monasteries. But then in the 9th century, in the mid-9th century, they persecute all foreign religions. They try to destroy Buddhism, because remember, Buddhism is foreign technically to China. It comes from India. It's not. So the late Tang Dynasty, a particular emperor decides that all foreign religions are bad. He destroys all monasteries. He defrocks all monks. He seizes all the assets in a few months. So many major Western missionary religions go extinct in China at that time. Indigenous Chinese Christianity, virtually extinct. Manichaeism, virtually extinct. Zoroastrianism in China, virtually extinct. You name it. All these religions, they were
suppressed underground, right?
They weren't big enough to survive this period of persecution. Buddhism was almost a theocracy. Chinese Buddhism in the Tang Dynasty was so big, it couldn't be killed, right? So despite the fact they tried to annihilate it, it came back right away. It was in the groundwater by that point. There's no way you could make China un-Buddhist. But those other religions never really were the same again after that. But they did survive as underground. So Manichaeism persisted as a blend, or as a kind of a subtle undercurrent within Chinese folk religion. And it's still there to this day, a tiny bit of it. Because what happened was the Manichaean institutions became recast as Buddhist, as purely Buddhist. So they didn't represent themselves as being Manichaean anymore. But a number of major rebellions had Manichaean factors. So the White Lotus Rebellion, which launches the Ming Dynasty, was caused by a messianic folk religious movement that was more or less equal parts Buddhism, Taoism, and Manichaeism, right? Because the whole notion of a messiah figure that leads a changing of the world order, right? That inaugurates a new imperial age. Where does that messianic concept come from? That's a Western religious idea that gets brought into Chinese folk religion by Manichaeism specifically. And these rebels that helped to launch the Ming Dynasty were so fearsome that they were almost immediately banned. Like one of the first things that the Ming Emperor did, it was like, say, Manichaeism is outlawed, because these folks were seen as a threat, and potentially it could do it again or whatever. And then it's a White Lotus is the movement, and eventually it happens again around the year 1800. So around the time of the American Revolution, there's another, like, a resurgence of the White Lotus rebellion in early modern China, and it ends up resulting again in a ban on Manichaeism that remained a legally prohibited religious movement until like 1900 or something. But
if I was going to ask you something specifically on Star Wars to get your thoughts, because Luke Skywalker sounds like the sun, and I was wondering if there's some combination of Sol Invictus, or if there was something in Manichaeism where the sun, the light, because the light would be the sun, and
that's a very good thing. I think his name was originally Starkiller. Like, there's a lot of the draft manuscript of the screenplay gets revised a lot. So I don't think there's like a single mass. I think that the fully developed narrative as we know it really comes into existence around 1980 when he's writing the screenplay for Empire Strikes Back. But the name Skywalker Sure. Again, the only person we could ask to know about this, because it is fiction, it is all made up.
Yeah, but isn't it a religion? That's another thing we've waited this long to actually mention. I'm sure a lot of our audience members who haven't really dug into Star Wars might be shocked to find out this is a real legit like cult, if you will, a following.
There are people who consider themselves Jedi, and some of them are atheists doing parody religion, similar to like the Church of the Subgenius or the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. So, in other words, it's called the Jedi census phenomenon. Particularly British atheists started calling themselves Jedi on census documents during this century, so that they could build it up, and Jedi indeed became bigger than Scientology. As officially recorded Jedi adherents became bigger of Scientology. And I don't think it's legal to do that anymore. I think Great Britain was like, because you're taking the piss, man. It's like the Pastafarians, with their the spaghetti colander headgear. That there's like real Pastafarians in Europe that demand the right to wear their religious attire of a flying spaghetti monster gear during driver's license photos and stuff like that.
So, or like in courts or something. I can't remember. They're trying.
But I don't want to say that it's all parody. I think that there are indeed some adherents of the Jedi religion that take it more seriously than just like a none of the above kind of category. So I hesitate. That's the problem with a thing like a census. When you're just counting people filling out government forms, it's hard to say for sure. I've certainly known Star Wars fans in my life that took it so seriously that it was like practically like a real religion to them. It can be like any fandom. It can verge upon religious devotion. I'm somebody who came of age. I'm a Gen X kid, and I came of age. I was too young to see I was born the year the first movie came out. I was too young to see that in the first round in the theater, but back in the 80s, they would replay them in the theater every couple of years. So I saw it when I was very young in the theater, like the second or third round of replaying it. I saw Empire when I was way too little to see it. My dad was a theater usher, and he took little baby Joe to his job with him. So I saw like Indiana Jones, and I saw like Empire Strikes Back when I was like, I had no business seeing those movies when I was like 3. Right. But they're some of my earliest memories are some of these scenes.
So wrapping things up in this particular, this has been a blast. What would you say at the end of the day people need to walk away with in this lecture series, or this idea that we're discussing pertaining to Star Wars and Manichaeism? I mean,
I will hesitate to say there's anything that significant. I think it's fun. I think it's cool. I just hope you were entertained, because the fact is that some of the historical arguments I'm making have changed over time. And if I were to talk to a specialist scholar of Manichaeism, they would split hairs about a lot of the individual arguments. That's all good. I'm not actually making a historical argument here. I'm saying my hunch is that George Lucas was influenced by academic literature that was available to him in the 1970s.
To come up with Yoda, for sure.
Right. And about the name Yoda. That's the main takeaway. And that other aspects of this particular tradition may have influenced the Star Wars concepts. I think that, and I would love it if George Lucas would comment on that at some point in his life. I doubt does he watch Myth Vision? Maybe he does. He's into myths. He's into this stuff. He is the kind of person who might be a fan of your podcast, Eric. So if he's watching, whatever, I can't say for sure. But,
if you're watching,
I'm not communicating any real deep, profound truth here, except for I've always been fascinated by this stuff. And there are other arguments related to these Manichaean Buddhist hybrid phenomena that I will make elsewhere. And maybe we'll have another more serious discussion of some of this stuff where we make more pointed academic arguments another time. I look forward to that possibility.
I look forward to it as well. Everybody can go check out your academia page down in the description. Is there anything else you'd like to mention?
Before you air this, I will provide a list of various interesting sources that you can check out. So I will. So we're recording this in advance, folks, in anticipation of Star Wars Day. So I suspect Derek's going to air it in a few days, and in that time, I will provide him a bunch of.
Yeah, I'll try and launch this.
Links that you can include in the comments section, so that people who are interested in some of these, I have articles I've written. I forgot to say, this is in anticipation of a recent thing I published in an online magazine called Vogue and View. And so that's going to be the first link, is going to be to the article that prompted this here chit chat.
Nice. Yeah, this will be on Patreon early for everybody who helps support us. So you'll be able to watch that, and maybe we'll launch this on the day, Star Wars Day. So
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, Joseph. I look forward to doing this again. Anything else you didn't mention that you might want to mention before we
Lots of things I didn't mention that I do want to mention, but we don't have time, so it's going to have to wait.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
I forgot. I said 5 minutes from now, I'll be like, damn, I should have said that. Oh, well.
It's okay. No biggie. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Never forget, we are Myth Vision.